Our relationship seemed perfect. I always considered us a happy couple, the kind many would call exemplary. We had been married for over 5 years, and during that time, we never had a serious argument. Our routine was simple but pleasant. Breakfast together, watching favorite shows in the evenings, and talking about our plans for the future. But recently, something had changed. At first, it was little things I didn't even pay attention to. She started getting up earlier than me, even though she was always a late riser, and often suggested spending the evening apart, citing tiredness or wanting a little alone time. I thought it was natural. Everyone needs their own space now and then. However, her behavior grew increasingly strange with each passing day. She began spending more time on her phone, even though she had always disliked social media and used to say that living in the moment was more important to her. Now, even during dinner, she was constantly checking her phone, receiving messages, and deleting them immediately. I tried joking. "Is it a secret mission for the CIA?" She just smiled and replied something like, "Oh, it's nothing. Just a friend sharing her problems." One time, as I was passing by the bedroom, I saw her talking on the phone. It wasn't just a regular conversation. She was speaking in a soft, tender tone, different from her usual voice. When she noticed me, she quickly ended the call without even saying goodbye to the person on the other end. "Who was that?" I asked. Her response was short. "Oh, it was Lisa. She's having trouble with her husband again. I didn't want to involve you in it." That night, I couldn't sleep. Something about her words and behavior wouldn't let me rest. The next morning, I resolved to let go of these thoughts and not let my suspicions ruin our relationship. But the incidents kept repeating themselves. A few days later, she told me she planned to meet with her friends in the evening. That wasn't unusual. She always enjoyed spending time with them. But this time something felt off. Normally, she would excitedly talk about their plans and what they were going to do. This time, her response was vague. "We're just going to hang out, have some coffee, and talk." Before she left, she spent a long time choosing her outfit. I joked that it was a bit much for a casual evening with friends. She laughed nervously and said, "Well, can't I look good for myself?" Her words made me uneasy, but I forced myself to stay calm. When she left, I noticed she had forgotten her phone on the kitchen counter. That was completely out of character for her. She always took her phone with her. Even to the bathroom, I looked at the device, and an overwhelming urge to check it swept over me. But the screen was locked, and I decided I couldn't betray our trust, even though I felt so uneasy. Sitting in the kitchen, I stared at her phone, debating whether I should check it when suddenly a message popped up on the screen. "I'm already waiting for you. I hope you don't change your mind." I froze. Something was definitely wrong, but I wasn't sure if it was just my paranoia. The next morning, I couldn't work or focus on anything. I kept replaying that message in my head. She acted as if nothing had happened, making breakfast as usual, smiling, and asking if I needed anything from the store. I watched her, trying to figure out what she was hiding. But this time, I didn't want to stay in the dark. I decided to take action. Anxiety gripped me. Her tone was filled with excitement, even fear. My hands trembled as I watched her. She paced the room, holding her phone, avoiding direct glances at the door. At one point, she stopped and whispered, "I don't want him to find out." I tried to make out the voice on the other end, but it was too muffled. I had only one option: keep watching and wait for more clues. The morning began like any other day. She acted calmly, talked to me about weekend plans, and asked if I wanted pizza for dinner. Her light smile seemed genuine, and I started thinking that maybe I was overreacting. But the memory of the recording from the previous evening lingered in my mind. I opened the app on my phone to check what had been happening at home throughout the day. The first few recordings showed nothing unusual. She was doing chores, folding clothes, and talking on the phone a couple of times. But then I saw something that made me pause. She was standing in front of the mirror, applying makeup. That was unusual since she always said she loved her natural look and never wore makeup at home unless she was going somewhere. Her hands moved quickly and confidently, as if she was doing it for someone special. Her eyes sparkled, and the smile I saw in the mirror was joyful. But it wasn't for me. I stared at the screen, feeling my suspicions grow stronger. She took a dress out of the closet. I recognized it. It was her favorite red dress, the one she only wore for special occasions. I remembered the last time I saw her in it. It was a few years ago, on our anniversary. She had said then that she felt like a queen in it, but she hadn't worn it since. I couldn't understand what all this was for. She looked happy, truly happy, but that happiness on her face made me feel like a stranger in her world. It was a kind of happiness I hadn't seen with me for a long time. Who was she preparing for? And more importantly, why? The next day, when she was home alone again, I decided to review the recordings once more. She opened the closet and started searching for something. Her movements were focused, as if she knew exactly what she wanted. After a few minutes, she pulled out a small velvet box I had never seen before. She opened it and took out a bracelet. I didn't recognize it either. It was an expensive piece, a gold bracelet with tiny gems that sparkled under the light. I paused the recording and tried to remember where she could have gotten that bracelet. We always bought jewelry together, and she usually consulted me. But this bracelet, it was foreign. Suddenly, I realized there was another recording I had missed. I quickly rewound the video and saw that a few days earlier, she had taken the box out of the mailbox. She looked around, as if checking to see if anyone was watching, and quickly slipped it into her bag. Her behavior struck me. She looked as if she were doing something forbidden. I decided to check our finances to see if she could have bought the bracelet herself. But after reviewing all the bank statements, I found no mention of this purchase. Then a chilling thought came to me. The bracelet could have been a gift. But who could have given it to her? The next day, while she was in the shower, I found the box and turned it over. On the back was a small engraving. To my sunshine, from A. My heart stopped. I didn't know any A in her life. Who was it? The next morning, as soon as she left for work, I quickly opened the app connected to the hidden camera. The recording from yesterday was still fresh in my mind. The bracelet with the mysterious engraving and her happy face. I felt confused, but something told me the worst was yet to come. I began scrolling through the recordings, fast-forwarding until I saw her opening the door. At first, I thought it was a courier since she often ordered things online. But no, it was a man, and he was clearly someone she knew. He looked confident, as if it wasn't his first time crossing our doorstep. Tall, athletic, with a casual smirk I instantly disliked. She greeted him with such joy that I froze. Her eyes lit up, her voice softened, and her laughter sounded far too genuine. It was so unlike her, as at home with me, she hadn't laughed like that in a long time. The man walked into the living room, and she quickly closed the door behind him. They sat at the table, and I saw her fetch 2 cups from the kitchen. She placed one in front of him, and they began talking. On the surface, everything seemed innocent. They laughed, discussed something, but every interaction between them filled me with doubt. She gestured casually, occasionally touching her hair, while he listened attentively, leaning in closer. At one point, I heard her say, "I'm so grateful you're here." I really didn't know who else to turn to. His reply was unclear, but his tone suggested words of support. Then came a detail that alarmed me. He suddenly pulled a small envelope from his pocket and placed it on the table. She looked at it nervously and then picked it up but didn't open it. Instead, she tucked it into her bag without mentioning what it was. What could it be? Money? A letter? Something I wasn't supposed to see? Their conversation continued for a few more minutes before they moved to the couch. They sat close, and the distance between them was far too intimate for mere acquaintances. She turned sideways, facing him, occasionally laughing nervously, like a girl on a first date. I couldn't take my eyes off the screen. It felt like I was watching a movie, but this was my home, my wife. I was about to turn off the recording when I suddenly saw him place his hand on her knee. It was a light gesture, but far too intimate for just friends. She didn't push him away. Instead, she looked at him with a faint smile and said, "You always know how to calm me down." Rage consumed me. How could she allow this? In our home? But I decided not to act immediately. I wanted to know more. I wanted to uncover the full truth, no matter how painful it might be. Before he left, she walked him to the door and hugged him. Their farewell seemed routine, as if this was a common occurrence. After he left, I noticed her pause for a moment in front of the mirror, adjusting her hair, and then looking into the envelope he had given her. Her face suddenly became serious, and she whispered, "I hope this will solve everything." I didn't know what was in that envelope, but I was certain of one thing. It was part of a secret she didn't want me to uncover. The next day, I couldn't find peace. Everything I had seen the day before left a deep mark on my mind. Her behavior, the mysterious envelope, the touches. My suspicions grew stronger, but part of me still tried to find a logical explanation. Maybe he's just a friend, I thought. But deep down, I no longer believed it. I opened the app on my phone as soon as I was alone. My heart raced, knowing I was about to witness something that could change everything forever. I fast-forwarded through the recordings and found the moment when that man appeared at our house again. This time, everything felt different. He came closer to lunchtime. She opened the door and immediately smiled warmly. Her face glowed with a joy I hadn't seen in our marriage for a long time. She quickly let him in, glancing over her shoulder as if afraid someone might see them. Her cautious behavior filled me with a deep sense of unease. They sat in the living room. He pulled the same envelope from his pocket that I'd seen before and handed it to her. She opened it, took out several documents, and read them carefully. "Will this really help?" she asked. He nodded and said something indistinct, but his tone was calm and confident. I couldn't understand what they were discussing, but I felt those papers held significant importance. After that, they began talking about something personal. Her laughter became soft and gentle. He sat closer than what would be appropriate for a friend. Then I saw him reach out and touch her hand. She didn't pull away. Instead, she lightly squeezed his hand, their fingers intertwining as they sat there for several seconds, gazing at each other. I felt the blood pounding in my temples. My suspicions turned into certainty. He wasn't just a friend. What I was seeing was much deeper. Their gaze carried something undeniable, a connection I had long lost with her. At one point, he leaned in closer and said something the camera couldn't capture. She smiled, and tears welled up in her eyes. She said something in response, placing her hand on his shoulder, and leaned in closer. Their faces were so close that I couldn't bear it anymore. I was ready to turn off the camera, but at that moment, they stood up from the couch. He hugged her. It wasn't a friendly gesture. His arms wrapped tightly around her, and she buried her face in his chest. They stood like that for several seconds, and it felt as if the world around them disappeared. It was something I hadn't seen in our home for years. Genuine intimacy. I almost turned off the recording, but decided to keep watching. And then something unexpected happened. She stepped back from him, looked him in the eyes, and whispered, "I just want to be sure he never finds out." His reply was even more shocking. "Don't worry, I'll take care of everything. You deserve to be happy." Who was this man? Why was he promising to take care of something? And what was she hiding from me? I turned off the screen, but the images continued to burn in my mind. Her embrace with another man, their intertwined fingers, the expression on her face, an expression I hadn't seen in years. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it might burst out of my chest. I sat in the empty room, surrounded by a silence more suffocating than any scream. At first, rage consumed me. Everything inside me screamed, I wanted to storm out, grab the phone, and demand to know how she could do this to me in our home. I wanted to smash something, anything within reach, to somehow release the pain and anger tearing me apart from the inside. But instead, I clenched my fists so tightly that I felt my nails dig into my skin. I had so many questions, but I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answers. The truth was staring me in the face, yet accepting it felt like the ultimate betrayal. Not just from her, but from the life I thought we had built together. How could she? How could the person I trusted with my entire life stand next to someone else and look at him the way she used to look at me? In our living room, in our home, my thoughts spiraled into an endless loop of questions I couldn't answer. After the first wave of anger came disappointment. I felt completely broken. All the moments we'd shared now seemed like lies. Our trips, dinners, late-night conversations, were they all just an illusion? I remembered her telling me a few months ago that we needed to work on our relationship more. At the time, I thought she said it from the heart. But now, I began to doubt every word she'd ever said. The feeling of betrayal was unbearable. I looked at the photos of us on the wall and felt like all those moments had lost their meaning. How could I have been so blind? Was it my fault that I let our relationship come to this? After the anger and disappointment came sadness. It engulfed me like a heavy blanket, suffocating me. I sat there with my head bowed, staring at my hands, which now felt empty. I thought of her smile, her voice, the way she always hugged me before bed. And now, all of that was gone. The sense of helplessness was suffocating. I couldn't just let it all go. But what could I do? I felt trapped with no way out. I imagined sitting down with her, showing her the recordings, and asking directly, "What does this mean?" In my mind, it played out perfectly. I would be calm and composed, and she would be shattered and confess everything. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't be that simple. What if she denied it? Or worse, what if she said she didn't care? I needed more evidence, more information. I decided I couldn't act blindly. If I was going to confront the truth, I needed to know everything. I opened the app and decided to review another recording. It was from the same day, just a little later. Something inside me told me I had missed an important detail. I didn't know what I was about to see, but I couldn't turn away now. When I opened the video, I saw the two of them standing by the door. He whispered something into her ear, and she smiled before doing the one thing I feared the most. She kissed him. It was hard for me to press play. Deep inside, I knew what I would see in the recording, but part of me still tried to deny the obvious. I still hoped it was some huge misunderstanding. But now, the truth was too close to ignore. I played the final recording from that day. At first, everything seemed ordinary. They stood in the living room, talking, laughing about something. Her voice was warm, even tender, something I hadn't heard in a long time. She looked relaxed, her eyes sparkling as she looked at him. The man moved closer to her, and their conversation fell silent. He tilted his head slightly, as if he wanted to say something, but instead, he just looked into her eyes. It was more than words. It was a moment where the world around them ceased to exist. She stepped closer. I saw her hand lightly brush against his. Their movements were so natural, as if they'd done this hundreds of times. Then it happened. He leaned in and kissed her. Not shyly, not cautiously. It was a deep, passionate kiss. She didn't push him away. Instead, her hands reached for his shoulders, and she kissed him back. Their embrace was so genuine, so intimate, that it felt like I was intruding on something I wasn't meant to see. I felt something break inside me. It wasn't just anger. It was fear, sorrow, and betrayal all tangled together. I wasn't sitting in my chair anymore. My hands were trembling, and all I could think was, how could she? I couldn't believe this was happening in our home, within the walls that had witnessed our hugs, our conversations, our love. How was this possible? What had I done wrong? Why hadn't I seen it before? As I was about to turn off the recording, my gaze fell on the man again. Something about his face seemed familiar. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, trying to recall where I had seen him before. His smile, his movements, they all triggered a sense of déjà vu suddenly. Fragments of memories started piecing together. Was he the man I'd seen in one of her photos? Or maybe the childhood friend she'd mentioned once in our conversations? Or was he a client from her work? But how could he be here, in our home, acting as if he had every right to be by her side? My thoughts tore me apart. On one hand, I wanted to storm into the house, tear off her mask, and demand to know who he was and what it all meant. But on the other hand, I knew I wasn't ready. I wanted more information, more proof. I needed to know everything down to the smallest detail before confronting this truth. I turned off the recording and froze for a moment. And then it all clicked. That man! I'd seen him before, but not in photos or stories. I had seen him a few weeks ago at a cafe near our house. He was sitting at a table with her, and back then, just like now, their behavior was too close for mere acquaintances. My heart pounded, and I realized I should have suspected it all along, but I just didn't want to admit it. I need to know everything, I thought. This time, I was ready to go all the way. I sat in the empty room, overwhelmed with emotions, yet composed and colder than ever. For days, I had tried to piece my thoughts together, searching for a logical explanation for everything that had happened. But I found nothing except pain and betrayal. I knew it was time to act. There was no point in hiding from the truth any longer. The day went by, and every moment spent at home with her was filled with a suffocating silence. She acted normal, but I could see that her gaze had become distant. She must have sensed the growing tension between us. I decided to wait for the right moment, when we were alone, to finally ask her everything. The next evening, when she came home, she looked tired. She wasn't expecting anything, and I knew this was my chance. I calmly suggested we sit down and talk. She looked a bit surprised but complied. We sat at the table, and I placed my phone in front of her. "We need to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, though inside, I was boiling with anger and pain. She looked at me curiously, and I continued, "I know something has happened between us that I can't ignore. I've seen some recordings, and I want to know what this means." My hands were trembling, but I forced myself to remain composed. I played the video showing her and that man together. How he kissed her, how she responded to his kiss. I couldn't stay silent anymore. "How do you explain this?" I asked, fighting not to lose control. She stared at the phone screen, not reacting immediately. I watched her expression shift from embarrassment to something softer. Her eyes, usually so honest with me, now seemed clouded. She took a deep breath and turned her head toward me. And then, instead of apologizing or confessing, she smiled. It wasn't a sad smile, the kind I might have expected from someone caught in a betrayal. It was a faint, strange smile, filled with something inexplicable, like an inner certainty. "I have my explanation," she said softly, her voice eerily calm. There was no fear in her words, no guilt, only a cold confidence. I froze, struggling to process her words. "You might not understand everything, but it's not what you think." I felt my chest tighten from the shock and betrayal. She was so sure of herself, as if she had been prepared for this moment. I took a deep breath, trying to stay in control. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. She looked at me again, her expression a mixture of sympathy and certainty that I couldn't decipher. She opened her mouth to explain, but the words didn't come out immediately. There was a pain in her eyes, one I couldn't quite place, and at the same time, her calmness kept me on edge, as if she knew exactly how to play this moment. Finally, instead of confessing or denying, she said, "I did it to protect us." but you won't be ready to hear the truth." Once again, her gaze turned distant, as if she was listening to voices I couldn't hear. She sat across from me, still wearing that unnerving calm smile, which only heightened my tension. After showing her the recordings, I had expected any reaction, apologies, tears, even anger. But her cold composure was like a knife cutting into me from the inside. I knew I was about to hear something that would forever change our lives. She took a deep breath, holding the air for a few seconds, as if preparing to leap off a high cliff. Her eyes, once distant, now looked filled with pain. "It's not as simple as you think," she began, her voice trembling. "That man, his name is Alexander. We were together years ago, long before I met you," she said, avoiding my gaze. She started nervously rubbing her fingers, as if searching for comfort. "We were very close. I thought he was the one I'd spend the rest of my life with." Those words hit me harder than I had anticipated. While I knew we all have a past, hearing it from her at this moment was unbearable. "And what? You just decided to show up again?" My voice was rough, and I didn't even try to hold back. "Yes," she replied quietly. "He came back to town a few months ago. He found me through mutual friends. At first, it was just messages. Then he asked to meet, said he wanted to apologize for everything that happened between us." I didn't know how to respond. I felt my hands clenching into fists. "And you just decided that it was fine? To bring him into our home? To let him act like I don't exist?" My voice rose, and I couldn't control my emotions anymore. She lowered her head again, as if trying to hide from my gaze. I didn't want it to go this far, but I couldn't say no to him. Her voice trailed off, and I saw tears forming in her eyes. "Why couldn't you say no?" I asked sharply, feeling my patience snap. She looked up, her eyes now filled with guilt and pain. "Because a part of me still wanted closure. I thought maybe I owed him that after everything we went through. But I didn't realize it would spiral out of control." "Closure," I repeated bitterly, the word tasting like poison. "You call this closure?" She wiped her tears, struggling to find the right words. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I never wanted to hurt you. But it's not that simple. There are things I still haven't told you, things I didn't know how to explain." The weight of her words crushed me. She had let him back into her life, into our life, and now everything I thought I knew was falling apart. Her apologies felt hollow, her explanations inadequate. And yet, I couldn't walk away without understanding everything. I leaned back in my chair, trying to steady my breath. "Then tell me," I said. "No more lies, no more half-truths. Tell me everything." She hesitated, her hands trembling slightly. I could see the fear in her eyes, but also a flicker of resolve. "You deserve to know," she said finally. And with that, she began to unravel a story that I knew would shatter whatever was left of the life we'd built together. I don't know why I did it. Maybe because he reminded me of a time when I was happy. Before life got complicated, before we started drifting apart, she finally raised her head, and in her eyes, I saw not only guilt, but something deeper. Sadness that she must have been carrying for a long time. "What are you saying? That it's my fault?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She slowly shook her head. "No, it's not about blame. It's just something changed between us. I don't know when it happened, but I feel it. We've become strangers. You're always busy, and we barely talk anymore." And he reminded me what it feels like to be needed. Those words hit like a dagger to the heart. "Needed?" I echoed, trying to grasp how we had come to this moment. She nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I didn't want this to happen, but it did. And now, I don't even know what to do." Her gaze, filled with despair, met mine as she softly added, "I'm not even sure this is just about us. Maybe I don't even know who I am anymore. And that hurts me too." I sat there in our empty living room, staring at the same walls that had witnessed so many moments of our life together. The same walls that had seen our first laughter, our arguments, and our embraces. But now, this place felt alien. Alien just like her. Her words kept echoing in my head. We've become strangers. I just wanted to feel like I could still be needed. They looped in my mind like a broken record, refusing to fade. What does this mean for us? Can you forgive something like this? And even if I do, could we ever live as though it never happened? On one hand, I felt anger. Anger at her for allowing this man into our lives, for bringing him into our home, our space. Anger for making me question myself. Was I not enough? What had I done wrong? But alongside the anger was pain. Pain in realizing that maybe she was right. We had become strangers. I thought back to the last few months of our life. How silence had replaced our conversations. How we spent time near each other, but never truly together. How I'd buried myself in work and missed the subtle ways she was changing, pulling away. Could I have fixed it if I'd noticed earlier? A part of me wanted to forgive her. We'd been together so long. We built this life together, dreamed together. How could I just let all of that go because of one mistake? But was it just a mistake? Or was it a sign that our relationship was already broken and all that was left were the fragments? I couldn't decide whether to give her a second chance. She had been honest with me when she could have hidden everything. She told me the truth, even if that truth shattered me. But is honesty enough to fix what's broken? I want to know what you think. What would you do if you were in my shoes? How can you forgive when trust has been destroyed? Can a relationship even be rebuilt after something like this? And if it can, how? Or would you just end it all? Sometimes it feels like the simplest path. Just saying, we tried everything we could. This is the end. But then what? How do you forget all those years? How do you start over from scratch? I sit here in our home, looking at the photos on the walls, trying to find an answer. But maybe there isn't one. Maybe there never was. I want to hear from you. What would you do in my place? Forgiveness or farewell? A second chance or a fresh start? Let me know. Maybe your story can help me find a way out of this labyrinth.